The coastlines we see on maps aren't true. There are whole cities underwater. In the seas we think we know. They hold the real shape of the ancient world. I want to talk about 25 of these sunken cities. There's a legendary Hindu kingdom. There's a Roman resort just drowned. After this, you won't see the ocean's edge the same way. These aren't just ruins, they're like blueprints, but ghostly ones. They show how the planet has changed. They show how real events could have started those old flood myths. We'll look at a Greek city lost in one night. It might be what inspired the Atlantis story. Then there's a modern lake in China. It has an ancient town perfectly preserved under it. So there's a forgotten story, probably hiding along whatever shoreline is closest to you. The first lost city starts with a text, a sacred one. The Mahabharata, the Hindu epic, describes a city. Dwarka, it was Lord Krishna's capital, a place of splendor with golden gates, vast palaces, a fortress by the sea, and the legend says when Krishna left this world, the city was taken back. The ocean swallowed it, the waves just covered it for a long time. That was myth, a symbolic end. But then, off the coast of Gujarat in India, marine archaeologists found something. In the Arabian Sea, they found ruins, not just scattered pieces, the outline of a port, huge stone blocks that look like walls, old stone anchors on the seabed for large ships. Pottery artifacts dated to several thousand years ago. A major urban center was there, and the layout shows planning, sections for different things. All of it now underwater, at a depth that means the land changed. For this to be a working port, the coast had to be miles farther out. The sea level was lower. Researchers put the timeline around 1500 BC. That matches a period of sea level rise, postglacial, the slow flooding of coasts everywhere. So you have a real place. It matches the legendary city's description, in the right location, inundated by the sea at a time that fits both geology and the old story. This isn't about proving a god was there. It's about a real event, the drowning of a homeland, how that echoes, how it gets woven into memory, into sacred story. Dwarka makes you wonder, how many other ancient epics are like that? Not fiction, but a long memory, a poetic memory of a lost world, a true coastline that vanished. From that beginning, the search goes deeper into a human empire, an enigmatic one. There's a city underwater off the coast of southern Greece, in Laconia. The water's clear there, so if you're snorkeling, you can see it. You can see streets, courtyards, rooms, all laid out in stone on the seabed. That's Pavlopetri. It's not a myth, it's real, a Bronze Age settlement. They date it to at least 2800 BCE, which makes it the oldest submerged city we know of, with a full town plan still visible. What's extraordinary is the clarity. It's not just some pottery fragments, it's not one wall, it's an entire urban blueprint. You can map the main streets. The individual buildings, public squares, family tombs, all in an order that shows planning, sophisticated community planning. One archaeologist called it a time capsule. A snapshot of daily life, frozen right when the sea took it. The cause was probably sudden, catastrophic. This region is seismically active. The leading theory is a massive earthquake, maybe connected to the Thara eruption to the north. In one violent episode, this whole section of the Peloponnese coastline just dropped, sank the city and its harbor. Studying the layout shows a society that was practical, connected. There's evidence of clever water management, channels to direct rainwater, and artifacts tell a story of trade. Materials from all across the Aegean. This was a thriving port. Its prosperity was built on a coastline that provided a safe harbor, a strategic harbor. A coastline that doesn't exist anymore. Pavlopetri makes you reconsider the map of early Greek civilization. If a city this advanced was operating here over 4,000 years ago, what else is out there? Along these sunken shores, its end was sudden, dramatic, which is a different kind of loss from what comes next, where the enemy isn't a single quake. It's the slow creep of water over centuries. A colossal stone pharaoh came up from the dark silt. His face was tilted toward a sun he hadn't seen in over 1,000 years. This was in the late 1990s. Underwater explorer Frank Goddio found it. He found more than an artifact. He found an entire lost world, there in the murky waters of Baiae off Egypt. He'd discovered the twin port cities, Thonis Herakleion and Canopus. For centuries, those names were just whispers from ancient Greek historians. They described them as the grand gateways to Egypt. Mandatory gateways, every Greek trade ship had to stop there. They had to pay their customs duties, have their cargo inspected before sailing up the Nile. Then, around the 8th century AD, they vanished from all maps, from all records, swallowed by the Mediterranean. The scale of what sank is breathtaking. Vast ceremonial complexes, harbors lined with hundreds of ancient anchors, monuments of staggering size. The cause was a perfect, slow-motion disaster. These cities were built on shifting clay, the unstable clay of the Nile Delta. Researchers think the immense weight of their own temples' massive granite blocks pressed down on that soft ground. Then combine that, a gradual rise in sea level, and the occasional violent quake common to the region. The foundation liquefied. The cities didn't just flood. They collapsed in on themselves, slid into the sea, a catastrophic failure of the very ground beneath them. Among the recovered treasures, one object tells a powerful story. It's called the Stele of Thonis, a large stone slab, inscribed with a decree from Pharaoh Nectanebo I. It states clearly, all goods entering Egypt from the Greek world must come through this port. The ancient equivalent of a federal customs law carved in stone. This proves these weren't just trading posts. They were administrative capitals, controlling the economic pulse of an entire coastline. Their existence shows a Nile delta that was far more robust, more extended than today, a coastline that could support deep water harbors and monumental architecture. All of it now completely underwater. Their loss rewrites our understanding of ancient Egyptian interaction with the wider Mediterranean. The coastline that facilitated that exchange is gone. Buried under meters of water and sediment, every gold coin down there, every ceremonial barge, every forgotten statue, they're all pieces of a puzzle. About global connection in the ancient world, but this story of sinking foundations leads to a different kind of disappearance, not slow subsidence, an instantaneous, terrifying force. The sea can take a city slowly over centuries, or it can happen in an afternoon. On June 7, 1692, Port Royal in Jamaica was the richest city in the English New World. And also the most notorious. By that afternoon, 2/3 of it was gone. A catastrophic earthquake, a tsunami dragged under the Caribbean. This wasn't some ancient place lost to legend. This was a modern port, thriving, a haven for pirates, for merchants, for naval officers. They called it the wickedest city on earth, and its story is a modern example. A coastline vanishing in an instant, Port Royal's wealth had a dark foundation. It was the hub for the Caribbean's triangular trade: sugar, slaves, Spanish plunder. All converged there. Pirates like Henry Morgan operated with official sanction. Their ships filled the harbor, taverns, brothels, merchant houses, all crowded onto a narrow spit of land. It was a symbol of raw colonial ambition, a chaotic monument to profit. Then the ground shook. Contemporary accounts describe violent tremors. The sandy soil underneath was saturated by the sea. And it underwent liquefaction. The solid ground turned into a liquid slurry. Brick buildings, wharves, streets, they just sank, swallowed whole as the land collapsed into the harbor. A tsunami wave followed, swept away what was left on the surface. Thousands of people died because it sank so quickly into anoxic clay sediment without oxygen. Port Royal is a time capsule. Marine archaeologists have found a city frozen in a moment. Wooden structures stand intact. Pewter plates sit on tables. A pocket watch stopped at 1143. These aren't just ruins, it's a preserved slice of 17th century colonial life, an unparalleled window into that era. The disaster rewrote Jamaica's coastline in a day. A bustling peninsula became a submerged archaeological site. It forces a difficult question. Port Royal was built on unstable ground, a sandy spit vulnerable to liquefaction. How many of our modern coastal cities sit on similar foundations, in seismically active zones? The story is a geological warning, a reminder that coastlines aren't permanent. They can be erased by the slow creep of water or by the sudden, devastating power of the earth itself. From that sudden collapse, we go back to something much older and slower, a process that consumed not just a city but an entire culture's connection to the sea. The stone circle is there under the Mediterranean. 10 meters down, it's a perfect arrangement of boulders, a ritual site older than the pyramids. Now it's just visited by fish. This is Atlit Yam off the coast of Israel. A Neolithic village from a time between 7,000 and 6,000 years before the Common Era. It's not a city of monuments, it's a snapshot of a community. Their homes, their wells, their tools, all preserved on the seabed in stunning detail. This discovery rewrites what we know about early settlement. Archaeologists found the foundations of rectangular houses. A well lined with stones that once gave fresh water, skeletons of domesticated animals, and piles of fish bones, so they mastered both farming and fishing. They weren't nomadic, they were settled. They built for permanence on a fertile coastline that's just gone now. The most telling clue to their end is in those wells. They were dug for fresh water, but they're filled with salt water now, submerged by the sea. That's physical proof of a slow, inescapable change. These villagers lived through the relentless rise of the Mediterranean. Research points to a major event, Meltwater Pulse 1b, a period of rapid glacial melt at the end of the last ice age. Global sea levels rose by roughly 40 meters over a few centuries. A staggering amount of water, coastlines retreated everywhere. This village and countless others were gradually inundated. The freshwater table became brackish, then salty. Their land just vanished beneath the waves. Atlit Yam offers a silent testimony. It shows the greatest stories of human adaptation and loss aren't always about sudden cataclysms. Sometimes the end comes as a slow, unstoppable creep. One generation might notice the wells tasting a little different. The next might see a favorite fishing rock disappear. The coastline of their world was moving and they couldn't follow. How many other chapters of the human journey are resting in similar shallow seas just beyond our sight? This theme of a world slowly drowning leads to a place where water didn't just erase a city. It helped forge a legend. Divers found something off the coast of Japan's westernmost island. This was near Yonaguni back in the 1980s, a huge structure rising from the seafloor. It looks like a terraced pyramid with wide, flat platforms. Sharp edges meeting at perfect 90-degree angles, features that look like steps carved for a giant. This is the Yonaguni monument, and it started a debate about how we see the ancient past. Geologists point to the powerful currents there. The bedrock is sandstone which fractures in straight lines. They say tectonic activity over millennia could have sheared these blocks. That the sea could have sculpted those terraces. Nature, they argue, is an architect. It can create formations that look designed. Other researchers see human intention. They highlight features that seem too precise, the consistent right angles, two tall, pillar-like rocks standing side by side, narrow, straight channels that look carved. If it's natural, why does it look like stepped pyramids from other ancient cultures? Some think it could be a remnant from when this area was dry land. During the last glacial period, sea levels were over 100 meters lower. What's now submerged could have been a coastal plain, a place where people might have built. The debate is about a timeline. If people shaped it, even partly, the monument would be over 10,000 years old. That challenges the established narrative of Japanese prehistory. It suggests a sophisticated coastal culture when much of humanity was still hunting and gathering. A Japanese Atlantis, not as myth, but as a possible reality. Maybe the truth is in the middle, an extraordinary natural formation that ancient people later recognized. Maybe they modified it or used it, a sacred site built upon a geological wonder. The sea obscures the line between what nature makes and what humanity creates. Yonaguni doesn't give easy answers. It asks us to look harder, to question what a city is, what a monument is. It makes us wonder what other shapes on the seabed we've dismissed as mere geology. They might be signatures of a forgotten world. That mystery makes the clarity of the next discovery even more striking, a city where the streets and homes leave no room for doubt. A ghost city sits in the deep water of a lake in China. This one wasn't lost to an earthquake or the ocean. It was given to the water on purpose. In 1959, the government needed a new power station for the city of Hangzhou. They built a dam on the Xinan River. The valley behind it started to fill, and in that valley was Shicheng, the Lion City, a place with over 1,300 years of history. Its most beautiful buildings were from the Ming and Qing dynasties. There were carved archways, temples with wide roofs, stone streets, and private homes. They decided not to move these historic structures. They let the water come. The reservoir, called Qingdao Lake, Thousand Island Lake, slowly covered the whole city. It's now between 100 and 130 feet down, but what was lost to progress was preserved. The cold, still freshwater of the lake kept it safe. Without salt or strong currents, the city stayed almost exactly as it was the day it flooded. Divers who go down there describe it. Ornate stonework, just a thin layer of algae, shows dragons and phoenixes and lions frozen in a roar. Entire streets you can swim through, doorways into courtyards, memorial archways for scholars and officials still standing. It's a complete frozen moment from Imperial China. Historians don't see a ruin, they see an underwater museum. The water captured the full fabric of a traditional Chinese city in a way no dig on land ever could. You can see how homes flowed into market areas, how temples were placed by ancient rules of geomancy. The layout itself is a document. It shows a coastline defined by a human decision. A modern, practical choice that made an ancient artifact in an instant. Shicheng asks a question about our time. We're reshaping the planet with dams and reservoirs and coastal developments. What are we making for the archaeologists of the far future? Which of our cities or parts of cities are we sacrificing to a new kind of sea? The Lion City is a reminder. The map isn't just drawn by tectonic shifts or melting ice. It's drawn by human hands for power, for progress, for survival. This idea of a city claimed by water leads from a modern decision back to a much older story. One that echoes across cultures, the story of a legendary, world-ending flood. The story is one of divine punishment, a wealthy, arrogant city on the North Sea coast full of vice and pride. They say the church bells rang out defiantly into a storm, and then, in a single night in January 1362, a massive storm surge broke the dikes and wiped Rungholt from the map. For centuries, it was like the Atlantis of the North Sea, a ghost story, a moral fable about hubris. But then, in the vast tidal mudflats of the Wadden Sea, at the very lowest tides, shapes started to appear. The outlines of long mounds, the ghosts of drainage ditches, the foundations of homes and a church. The sinful city from the stories had a real, physical location. Coastal geologists put the disaster together. The event was real, known in history as the Groot Mandrenk, the Great Drowning of Men. A monstrous North Sea storm hit at high tide. But the real vulnerability was something they did themselves. The people of Rungholt were prosperous from a specific trade, digging peat. They cut that dense, carbon-rich soil from the marshy ground to burn for fuel. And this practice, over generations, it literally undermined their world. The peat was like a sponge. It held the saturated land together. Removing it caused the ground to sink, lower and more susceptible to flooding. They were, in a very literal sense, digging their own graves. So when the storm surge came, the weakened dikes just gave way completely. Rungholt wasn't an isolated town, though. It was part of a much larger, now vanished region called Atlit, a fertile, populated coastal plain that stretched beyond today's chain of Frisian islands. The medieval coastline was dozens of miles farther out into what's now the North Sea. The storm of 1362 didn't just destroy one city. It permanently redrew the map, creating those fragmented islands and treacherous shallows we see now. Finding Rungholt's traces confirms that this lost world wasn't a myth. It was a settled, organized society that just ceased to exist in a geological instant. This story bridges a gap. It shows how a single, catastrophic weather event can erase a community so completely that it only survives as legend. A real tragedy becomes a cautionary tale. It makes you look at other European folklore, stories of drowned lands like Lyoness off Cornwall or Cantra Gwaelod in Wales. How many of those are also memories of real coasts, real storms, real losses? Rungholt teaches that sometimes the most fantastical myths are just history, remembered in the language of awe and warning. There are these ancient walls in the Bay of Elander on Crete. They break the surface of the water, just a quiet, stony line in all that turquoise, a submerged causeway. It still guides boats through the channel today. That's what's left of Olous, a Dorian city-state. It was powerful once, rivaled Knossos, but the real story isn't in the walls you can see, it's underneath them. Archaeologists mapping the seabed found the city's signature, not temples, wells, dozens of them, carved down through the rock to reach freshwater, a city with 100 wells. That tells you something. It tells you Olous mastered its environment, secured that vital resource on a porous, limestone coast. This wasn't a settlement. It was a hydrological fortress, its prosperity built on a deep understanding of the water table, but that understanding couldn't save it from the ground. The whole northeastern coast of Crete is sinking, tectonic subsidence, the African plate sliding under the Aegean plate. The land tilts, it lowers. For Olous, that meant a slow defeat. The coast subsided, the sea advanced, salt water got into the wells, poisoned the city's lifeblood. The harbor, once bustling with trade to Egypt and the Levant, grew shallower. Less viable, the very coastline that made it a strategic powerhouse was being erased, meter by meter, century by century. You can see the evidence on the seabed. The submerged breakwaters and quays, sophisticated engineering, built for a sea level and a shoreline that don't exist anymore, built for a world that sank beneath them. Olous gives you a clear lesson in Mediterranean geology. The coast here isn't a fixed line, it's a temporary arrangement, a snapshot in a process of collision and subsidence. Those silent wells are more than curiosities. They're ancient dipsticks measuring the slow creep of the sea. They make you ask a question for our own time. How many of our great coastal cities are built on land that's just as temporary? Olous thrived by solving the water problem. Then it was defeated by the movement of the earth. Human ingenuity meeting a larger, slower force, and from these clear, sunlit waters, the search leads somewhere else, a legendary bay where the line between history and myth dissolves into the murk. The Gulf of Khambhat has this mystery. In 2001, oceanographers from India's National Institute of Ocean Technology were doing a pollution survey. Their sonar picked up something. Over a huge area of the seabed, more than 100 feet down, the scans showed these geometric patterns, right angles, grids, the shapes of what could be massive structures across an area bigger than Manhattan. The announcement was huge. They suggested these might be ruins of a vast settlement, maybe 9,500 years old. That would be older than the earliest Indus Valley cities by thousands of years. It would change the history of Indian cities, putting complex society back when this whole basin was dry land, a river valley fed by the ancient Sarasvati during the last ice age. The coastline then was miles farther out. The idea was revolutionary, but science needs evidence, and right away archaeologists were cautious. The main evidence is still those sonar images. Marine geologists pointed something out. The Gulf of Khambhat has some of the strongest tidal currents on the planet. Those currents scour the seabed. They can erode soft sediment and leave harder rock in linear, angular shapes. What looks like a wall to sonar might just be a natural sandstone ridge. Carved by the water, then they dredged up a few artifacts, wood and stone. Some said they had tool marks. They were carbon dated to very old dates, but dredging is a problem. It pulls material from a wide, disturbed area. You can't be sure what layer it came from. You lose the context. One archaeologist said an ancient piece of wood in a river valley doesn't prove a city. It just proves a tree. This is underwater discovery. The desire to find lost worlds is strong. It shapes how we see ambiguous data. The Bay of Cambay isn't about fraud. It's about the difficulty of separating a hopeful story from a verifiable fact. It shows the responsibility. Extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence. And that evidence needs meticulous, peer-reviewed methods. The site is still a mystery. It might hold a secret, a city from a forgotten chapter, or it might be a lesson in scientific caution. A reminder that the seafloor is a canvas. Nature paints with a bold, deceptive hand. That tension between hope and rigor makes the next discovery more powerful. When the answers are written not in sonar shadows but in solid, sunken stone. A stone staircase goes right into the Mediterranean. You can walk down the steps of an ancient burial site, past tombs cut into the rock, and the path doesn't stop at the shore. It goes under the water, that turquoise color, heading toward the faint shape of an old harbor wall. This place is called Aperlae on the southern coast of Turkey. It wasn't a city swallowed in a day. It's a place that sank by inches, a lesson in slow loss. The ruins here make a perfect timeline in stone and in sea. Up on the dry hills, you have the city walls, the foundations of houses. A bit lower, right at the water's edge, are the remains of a Byzantine church. Its floor gets covered by the tide sometimes. Wade into the water, and you find the submerged harbor walls, the quays where ships would dock. Go deeper with a mask, and you see the most telling ruins. Lines of stone vats built into the shallows. It's like a bathtub ring. Each depth is a different century in Aperlae's life, a stair-step descent into the sea. The reason for this slow drowning is tectonic. This whole Lycian coast is on a fault line. The Anatolian plate is being pushed and twisted. The land is subsiding, tilting down. Combine that with the slow, global rise of sea level since the last ice age, and you get a recipe for steady encroachment. The sea didn't hit Aperlae with a wave. It advanced with infinite patience, claiming a few more inches of a street, another corner of a building with each generation. Those submerged vats tell you why people lived here. Aperlae was famous for one thing, Tyrian purple, the very valuable dye from the murex sea snail. The stone tanks you see underwater were part of that industry. They were likely for soaking or crushing or fermenting the snails to get the pigment. This was an economy built on the very coastline that's now vanishing. The city's wealth came from the sea, and in the end, the sea took the city's footprint back. Aperlae makes you read the landscape differently. It shows that environmental change isn't always a sudden disaster. It can be a creeping reality, recorded in the exact waterline of a forgotten church or the depth of a dye vat. How many other ports around the Mediterranean share this same quiet fate? Their ruins aren't in the deep abyss. They're in the shallows, in a slow, stair-stepped retreat that mirrors the patient sinking of the land. This story of gradual surrender stands in contrast to what comes next. A city that didn't sink by inches but was erased in minutes by a wave of legend. Helike went under the water in one night. Ancient Greek writers wrote about it. That was 373 BCE, a winter night. It was a powerful city-state, part of the Achaean League, and it just disappeared. For a long time, no one knew where it was. Then, in the late 1980s, archaeologists began to find things, not in the sea, though. They found clues inland, buried under silt and gravel. They found the ruins of Helike, perfectly preserved, but in the wrong place. It wasn't under the modern shore. It was under a coastal plain, kilometers from the sea. Seismologists put the story together. It started with a huge earthquake. The ground shook along a fault in the Gulf of Corinth. The shaking was so strong it liquefied the ground. The soil was waterlogged and it turned to slurry. The solid earth became fluid, and then the earthquake displaced water, which caused a tsunami. The wave came inland over the city as it was collapsing. When the water went back out, Helike was gone, sunk, and then buried. A lagoon formed over it, hiding everything for generations. The coastline was rewritten in just hours. This was more than a city lost. It was a cultural shock. Helike was a major center, political and religious. It had a sanctuary to Poseidon, the earth shaker, the sea god. For it to be erased like that, completely and suddenly, would have seemed like the wrath of a god. Philosophers and historians talked about it, including Plato. Plato was alive when it happened, and that connection to Atlantis is strong. Plato wrote his dialogues about the lost island maybe 50 years after Helike sank. His story is about a powerful, advanced civilization. They anger the gods, and the sea swallows them in one day and night. The parallels are there. A real, devastating event, fresh in memory, could have been the seed for an allegory. Helike makes Atlantis feel less like fiction, more like a myth built on real, collective trauma. Finding Helike confirms something about how legends start. They don't come from nothing. They grow from actual events, watered by fear and awe. The discovery is a point where history and myth meet. It makes you look at other stories of drowned lands differently. Not as fairy tales, but as possible echoes of real coastlines lost to real waves. If Helike could inspire a story that lasts, then what other sunken truths are waiting? Not in the deep ocean, but under the quiet soil of our own shores. The water here is so clear, you can look down from the surface and see the mosaic floors. From a Roman villa, intricate patterns, colored stone laid for a banquet hall. Now there are schools of silver fish swimming over them. This is Baiae. On the Bay of Naples, it wasn't a city for merchants. It was a resort, a playground for Rome's most powerful, the wealthiest. Emperors and senators built sprawling villas here to escape the heat of the capital, the politics, and today a lot of it is underwater, not in the deep sea, but right here in the shallow bay, in the sunlight. You can snorkel over colonnaded walkways. You can peer into rooms where the elite once lounged. This slow drowning, it wasn't from the ocean rising. It was the land itself breathing. The whole area is inside the Phlegrean Fields, a vast volcanic caldera. The ground goes through a process called bradysism. a magma chamber far below inflates and deflates. And the land rises and falls over decades. For centuries at Baiae, the trend has been subsidence, a slow, relentless sinking. Those luxurious waterfront properties, built right at the edge for the best views for access to the thermal springs. They were the first to go. The sea advanced inch by inch, claiming marble terraces, ornate baths, shaded porticos, the geothermal activity that made Baiae attractive, the hot springs for its famous baths. That's part of the same volatile system that doomed it. Archaeologists looking at the submerged ruins see a lesson in Roman engineering. They built magnificently, with confidence that their marble and concrete were permanent. They channeled the volcanic springs into heating systems for their baths. They built piers and breakwaters, but they were building on a living foundation. A shifting one. The coastline here was never a fixed line. It was a temporary frontier in a slow-motion geological war. The submerged statues, the toppled columns, they're not just ruins. They're a measure of that movement, a gauge, showing how many feet the land has sunk since the time of Caligula or Nero when they partied here. So what does Baiae's fate tell us? It shows that even the greatest empire couldn't engineer its way out of nature's deeper rhythms. They harnessed the volcano's power for pleasure, but they couldn't stop its slow, patient reclamation. This submerged decadence is a powerful symbol, a reminder that the most stable-looking coast can be an illusion, just a snapshot in a process that operates on a scale far beyond human lifetimes. From this volatile, luxurious bay, the story moves to a different kind of water, not the salty sea, but the powerful, sediment-laden flow of a great river. Where an entire city was lost to the mud, there's a single temple at Mahabalipuram, right where the sand meets the Bay of Bengal, the shore temple. It was built by the Pallava dynasty over 1200 years ago. But the local Tamil legend always said there was more. They said this wasn't the only one, that it was the seventh temple, that 6 other pagodas once stood with it in a line gleaming in the sun. And the story goes that the gods grew jealous. In one night, the sea rose up and swallowed 6 of them, left just this one behind. For centuries, people thought that was just a story, a metaphor. Then, in 2004, the Indian Ocean tsunami hit. The force of it pulled the water back, far back from the shore, and for a few minutes, people saw something. Where there should have been sand, they saw long rows of stone, the outlines of walls, big man-made blocks. The sea had pulled back and shown a secret. The legend wasn't a myth, it was a memory. After that, archaeologists went to work. They scanned the water off the coast with sonar. They mapped a huge area underwater. Structures spread over kilometers from the shore out into the bay. They found a massive stone wall, 2 meters high, 70 meters long. They found fallen pillars, the foundations of pillared halls. This was a layout, a major center from the Pallava period, the same time as the shore temple. So why is it underwater? The land has likely been sinking slowly. Tectonic subsidence and sea levels have been rising since the Pallava era, so the water just kept coming in. Mahabalipuram was a port city, trading with Southeast Asia. Its coastline used to be farther out. Those waterfront temples and quays are now under meters of water. These submerged structures are proof of the legend. But they are also a blueprint. They show a society that built right at the water's edge, confident in their trade, devoted in their faith. The stone that survived gives us a measurement. It shows how much land the sea has taken, and it makes you look at the whole coast of India, at all the ancient temples there, and wonder, how many of those are the last ones standing? How many other shorelines have footprints we can't see anymore? The truth at Mahabalipuram wasn't really in history books, it was in the fishermen's stories. And it was etched on the seabed, but that discovery in salt water leads somewhere else, to a different kind of submerged world, not in an ocean bay. In the still, deep water of a mountain lake, a city isn't always lost to the sea. Sometimes it's lost to the land. There's the ancient port of Taparura. It's under the streets of Sfax in Tunisia. You don't find it by diving, you find it by digging. Beneath the Medina, the old Arab quarter, they've pulled up Roman pottery. Stone anchors, the outlines of wharves. It's a different kind of submersion, buried not under open water, but under centuries of silt, under the foundations of a newer world. That Roman harbor was a thriving center on this coast, but the nearby river carried sediment, a constant load of it. Over hundreds of years, that silt filled the harbor basin. Then, in the medieval period, people accelerated it. They deliberately used earth and rubble to fill in the old port area. They built right over it, extending the city outward. What was a waterfront became an inland neighborhood. The coastline didn't just change, it moved. The shoreline was pushed farther out, leaving the Roman port high and dry. Buried under meters of earth, it makes you rethink the word sunken. The ancient coastline of Taparura isn't underwater. It's under a marketplace, under someone's home. Core samples taken across modern Sfax, they act like a geological biopsy. They show layers, marine sand, then Roman construction debris, then medieval fill. It's a timeline of a retreating sea, written in dirt. Those Roman engineers had built moles and breakwaters to create a calm harbor, but their brilliant engineering became its own trap. Those structures slowed the water flow, which made the silt settle faster. They designed a perfect port, only to design its own burial. So the search for lost coastlines isn't just about scanning the seabed. Sometimes it's about listening to the ground beneath our feet. It asks you to look at modern cities in a new way. The oldest part of town might not mark the original center. It might mark the ancient waterfront, a place where ships once docked, now a kilometer from the sea. This burial under earth is a quieter end than a cataclysm. It's a slow forgetting, a coastline erased not by a wave but by 1,000 cartloads of dirt. From this city sealed in soil, the search swings back. Back to the open ocean, to a fabled name that has haunted explorers for centuries. The loss isn't just measured in cities, it can be measured in continents. Southeast Asia has this hidden geography. You look at the map at the islands, Java, Sumatra, Borneo. They look separate, surrounded by deep water. But under the Java Sea, under the Gulf of Thailand, there's a different map. A huge, submerged shelf, Sunderland. Back in the last ice age, when sea levels were 100 meters lower, this wasn't islands. It was one landmass, a single continent, almost the size of India, connecting Asia to Indonesia. The coastlines then were hundreds of kilometers away from where they are now. It was fertile, probably populated, a lost world that didn't vanish from a quake, but from a slow, global drowning. Geologists mapped that old landscape with sonar, with core samples. They traced these ghost rivers that used to flow across the plain. Geneticists see it in DNA in modern populations, suggesting migrations across that flooded bridge. The timeline is deep. The flooding started around 14,000 years ago. It accelerated as the glaciers melted. It wasn't one event. It was this relentless, generation-by-generation retreat of the shore. For the people there, it was just life. The land your grandparents knew became your grandchildren's fishing grounds, and then it was just gone, under the waves. That perspective changes the search. Looking for sunken cities here, like those structures in the Java Sea, it's not just about ruins, it's about tracing the coastlines of a whole vanished continent. Could this shelf be the cradle for early Asian civilizations we don't know about? The flood myths all across this region, from the Philippines to Malaysia, they might not be stories. They could be memories of this greatest loss, a homeland slowly eaten by the sea. Those 25 cities are like individual stars in a much larger, erased constellation. They're points on a map of a world that's gone. Sunderland makes you think bigger. The true ancient coastline isn't just a line that moved, it's a whole geography that disappeared. From that continental vision, the focus narrows again to a specific bay where the water holds a different secret, the Gulf of Khambhat. It asks for a different kind of exploration. Not of the place, but of the process, how you understand it. That's where the story of a possible lost city meets modern science. The first discovery used side-scan sonar. Sound pulses mapping the seafloor, the images came back. They showed these large geometric patterns, grids, right angles across a huge area. The immediate thought was architecture. But sonar only suggests, it shows shapes, not where they came from. To move from a suggestion to a discovery, there's a sequence. After sonar, you might use coring. A hollow tube driven into the seabed. It pulls up a column of sediment. That core is a timeline, layers of sand, silt, clay, over millennia. If a city was there, the core might find a layer. Charcoal from fires, pottery fragments, in a distinct stratum you can date. Then there's carbon dating, measuring decay in organic material, wood, bone. To find its age, but context is everything. A piece of wood dated to 9,000 years is profound. But if it came from a seabed churned by powerful tides, its connection to those sonar shapes is gone. It could have washed in from anywhere. The critique of Khambhat focuses on that exact point. Marine geologists look at the environment. The Gulf has fierce tidal currents. The bedrock is sandstone. It fractures along straight lines from tectonic stress. Over centuries, currents scour away softer material around the harder blocks, leaving formations that look like walls or platforms. What sonar sees as a structure could be a natural, geometric ridge. The argument for human activity points to reported finds. Worked wood, pottery fragments, stones with possible tool marks, but without a secure, undisturbed context. They're just clues, not proof. This rigorous process is the engine. It's how you separate a story from verified history. The protocols are clear. You need a clear stratigraphy. Artifacts in situ, exactly where they were left. Patterns of human activity, post holes for buildings, hearths, middens of discarded shells, things that can't be explained by natural forces. An extraordinary claim, like a civilization older than the Indus Valley by thousands of years, needs evidence that leaves no room for geology. So what does the Gulf of Khambhat show? It shows the coastline of scientific responsibility. The most fascinating lost worlds aren't just found, they're proven. Layer by careful layer, against a planet that creates its own deceptions. The quest isn't diminished by this rigor, it's deepened. It asks us to be better readers of the past, to listen as carefully to the Earth's natural explanations as to the call of a sunken city. This focus on method shifts the gaze from a single, disputed bay to a broader pattern. Written in stone across the Pacific, they say you can hear church bells from under the water, out in the North Sea, off Suffolk when there's a storm. That's the story of Dunwich. It was a capital once, a major medieval port, one of the biggest in England. Now it's just a small village. Almost everything else is gone, eaten by the sea, and it wasn't a single event. It's a slow, steady consumption. A coastline that keeps pulling back, recorded year after year, century after century. You can go stand on those cliffs and look east, the water below churning at this soft, sandy base. Geologists call it glacial till, loose sediment, sand and clay. It's soft, it doesn't resist, so when a strong storm comes, the waves don't just hit, they undercut. They take these great bites out of the cliff, and then with a roar, a whole section falls. A church, a street, houses, it all tumbles down into the surf and it's gone. This has been happening since at least the 1300s. A huge storm in 1286 started the real decline. It silted up the harbor, it cut the town off from its trade. More storms came after, each one took more. You can see it in the old records, the old maps. They list churches that aren't there: All Saints, St. Peter's, St. Leonard's, over a dozen churches plus monasteries, hospitals, guild halls. One by one, they reached the crumbling edge and fell. The last big one, All Saints Church, finally went in the early 1900s. Its ruins were right on the cliff, a tourist spot, until they too collapsed into the sea. Now the whole medieval town is on the seafloor. Divers have mapped it. They find stone blocks, foundations, pieces of daily life scattered down there. It shows a shoreline that used to be hundreds of meters farther out. And the thing is, it's continuous. This isn't just old history, it's still happening. The village museum has photos from just a few decades back showing cliffs that are gone now. The coast is still moving west. It's a clear, visible lesson. Some changes aren't hidden in deep water. They happen right in front of you at the edge of a cliff. Done, which makes you ask a question for now. With seas rising and storms getting stronger, how many towns today are living a slower version of this? Their fate isn't decided by one night's disaster, but by a patient, hungry sea. But this kind of erosion, this visible loss, is different from another kind of keeping. Not in a churning ocean, but in the still, salty deep of an inland sea. Lake Murray in South Carolina is a modern lake. It's a reservoir, a place for boating now. But before the 1930s, this wasn't a lake. It was the valley of the Saluda River. There were towns there, farms, family cemeteries. They built a dam to power Columbia. The water rose. More than a dozen communities were flooded on purpose. Houses went under, churches, schools, miles of roads. This wasn't an accident. It was a decision. It made a new shoreline and buried an old world. Now, when droughts come, the water drops, and that lost world comes back into view. You see old stone foundations, rusted car frames from the 1920s, gravestones in family plots. The inscriptions are visible again. Divers go down into the deeper parts. They describe this preserved place, intact chimneys standing on the lake bed. They follow old roadbeds lined with silt now. They see the concrete pads where general stores once stood. For historians, it's an archive, a snapshot of rural American life right before the Great Depression. The nails that were used, the bottles that were thrown away. The layout of a farm, it's all a story, a specific time, frozen when the water came in. The loss was deep, families had to leave, graves were moved, but not all of them. A landscape of memory was erased, replaced by a new, useful shoreline. Lake Murray makes you see sunken cities differently. This isn't some ancient tragedy from geology or a myth. It's modern, it was intentional. We created this underwater museum. Future archaeologists will study these remains. They won't be looking for tectonic shifts. They'll be looking at decisions from the early 20th century. Our reservoirs are becoming the submerged cities of tomorrow. They show how a human-altered coastline or a lake shore enters the geological record almost immediately. It blurs the line completely. What we call natural change and what we call human change are now wrapped together. So it asks a quiet question. As we keep reshaping the planet for our needs, what responsibility do we carry for the landscapes we choose to flood? What stories are we writing on the lake beds of the future? From this modern, manufactured depth, the journey turns back to the ancient world, to a trading hub so wealthy, its drowning became a symbol. A sign of judgment, statues of Isis and Serapis. They were made for temple courtyards, but they were found on the seabed, in the same silt that took Heracleion. This was Manauthes, its sister city, a place of pilgrimage. Other cities lived on trade. Manauthes lived on faith. It was a sanctuary for the healing gods Isis and Serapis. People came from across the Mediterranean. They came for cures, for prayers, to sleep in the temples, hoping for a dream. The coastline wasn't just a port. It was a spiritual threshold. The temples were built right there where the Nile's fresh water met the salt of the sea, a meeting of life and eternity. The things from the mud tell that story, not tax records but bronze lamps for rituals, inscribed offerings from pilgrims, statues of priests frozen in devotion. These finds draw a different map, a coastline of sacred sites where the divine felt powerfully close, and that had political weight. Controlling these cult centers meant controlling people's loyalty. The Ptolemaic dynasty knew this. They promoted Serapis worship here to unite Greek and Egyptian traditions in these delta cities. When the ground turned to liquid and the sea came in, it wasn't just cities that were lost. It was the beating heart of a living religion. The drowning of Manauthes of its sacred objects helped these ancient Egyptian practices fade from the coast. Faith needs a physical anchor like trade does. When that anchor sinks, the tradition drifts, so the loss changes the map. It shows holy landscapes were as vulnerable as economic ones. A coastline can be a place of prayer, then a silent, watery grave. This sacred drowning asks a quiet question. How do you measure the loss of a place where people came for hope? The ruins of commerce you count in coins and weights. The ruins of faith are measured in more fragile things. And from this silent spiritual loss, the story turns toward a roar. A city taken not by the patient sea, but by the furious, choked rage of a great river. A strategic decision can drown a homeland faster than any earthquake. In the 16th century, there was the long Dutch revolt against Spain, and the prosperous polder region of Shicheng was a prize. It was rich farmland, dotted with villages and castles, protected by a complex system of dikes along the Scheldt estuary. Then in 1584, the Dutch defenders faced an impossible choice. A powerful Spanish army was advancing, poised to take that fertile ground. To stop them, the Dutch did the unthinkable. They opened the dikes themselves, they let the sea in. Salt water surged across the fields, inundating everything. The Spanish advance was halted, but Shicheng was sacrificed. A thriving agricultural landscape was transformed in a matter of days into a vast drowning marsh. That wartime flood was never fully reclaimed. The land became the drowned land of Shicheng, the largest brackish water wilderness in Europe. What was once a managed coastline of farms and communities is now a haunting tidal landscape, mud flats and creeks. At the lowest tides, the ghosts of that lost world emerge. The foundations of the drowned village of Namen are sometimes visible, field boundaries, the outlines of lost roads, even the footprints of castles can be traced in the silt. These are not just ruins, they are the stark geometry of a peacetime coastline preserved in mud, a map drawn not by nature but by a desperate act of war. This example shifts our understanding. It shows how coastlines change. It wasn't geology or climate that rewrote this shore. It was a human decision made in a moment of conflict. The dike breach was a weapon, and the resulting transformation was permanent. The Scheldt estuary's coastline today is a direct legacy of that 16th century tactic. It asks a sobering question for all of history. How many other shorelines, from ancient times to modern conflicts, bear the hidden scars of similar decisions? Where fertile deltas or sheltered bays were deliberately flooded to stall an enemy, creating new coastlines that would last for centuries, Shicheng stands as a monument to a brutal truth. Sometimes the most dramatic changes to our world are not accidents of nature. They are calculated acts of survival. From this landscape shaped by war, we turn to a quieter, slower force of change. One where the enemy was not an army, but the delicate balance of life itself. Trawlers in the North Sea, they pull up these strange things, not fish, ancient tree stumps, roots still holding onto soil that hasn't seen daylight in 8,000 years. Or bones, mammoth bones, auroch, lion bones, from a time when those animals walked a plain between Britain and Denmark. That place is Doggerland. It wasn't a city. It was a whole country, a Mesolithic world just gone under the water. It had rolling hills, deep river valleys like the Rhine and the Thames, forests of oak and hazel. Big peat bogs, people lived there, they hunted, they followed herds. Their coastlines went on for hundreds of miles, out into what's now just open ocean. Then the world warmed, glaciers melted, and the sea started coming in. It kept coming. Between 6500 and 6200 BCE, the end was fast. Research suggests a final, catastrophic hit, the Storegga slide, a massive underwater landslide off Norway. It set off a tsunami. That wave would have wiped out the last of the low plains. Any survivors, the few there were, they would have seen their home erased in one day. The drowning of Doggerland, it wasn't just the environment changing. It was a mass migration. It pushed the last hunter-gatherers off those plains into the hills of Britain and the continent. It reshaped human geography in Northern Europe for good. That trauma, that memory of a world lost under the water, it echoes. You hear it in the flood myths from the British Isles to Scandinavia. The story of a great flood, it's not just a metaphor. It's a deep cultural memory of a real event. Doggerland gives you the ultimate scale. Those 25 sunken cities we talk about, they're individual points. But Doggerland is the whole erased constellation. It shows that the ancient coastlines, they weren't just different lines on a map. They were the borders of entire countries. Countries that don't exist anymore. So mapping a ghost continent, how do you do that? Scientists use seismic data, like a sonogram of the seabed, to trace those drowned river valleys. They pull up sediment cores, look for pollen, to rebuild the old forests and bogs. Every mammoth tooth in a net, every piece of worked flint on a beach, it's a coordinate. A point on a map of a world we can only walk in our minds now. With technology, this grand prehistoric loss, it frames every specific city we've looked at. They aren't isolated tragedies, they're recent chapters in a story that started when the ice first began to melt. Sybaris was famously wealthy even back then. A Greek colony in southern Italy, founded around 720 BCE, it became a byword for luxury. They said wine was piped to houses, that horses were trained to dance to flute music for parades. That's where the word Sybaritic comes from, but that wealth created envy. In 510 BCE, the rival city of Croton attacked. They destroyed Sybaris completely. And then they diverted the Crati River to flow over the ruins to make sure it was gone, but the water didn't just destroy it, it started to hide it. The river and its tributary, the Crathis, carried huge amounts of silt down from the mountains. Over centuries, that sediment settled. Layer after layer of mud and soil built up, burying the ruins under meters of earth. The ancient coastline here, it didn't recede because the sea rose. The land built outward. The river delta advanced, pushing the shoreline farther out to sea. And it sealed the city in a tomb of earth. For archaeologists, finding it was a different kind of problem. They weren't looking underwater. They were looking under farmland. The method was stratigraphy, reading the timeline in the dirt. They used coring techniques, drilling deep into the plain, and the cores told the story. A layer of Roman material, then a gap, then a rich layer from Thurii, the city that came next, and finally, at the deepest levels, the first Sybaris. Pottery, foundations, streets, all in distinct, buried horizons. This burial on land obscured the city as completely as the ocean could. It hid the old Greek coastline, which once had a busy port. Now that port is kilometers inland, stranded by silt, so it changes what we mean by a lost city. It doesn't have to be submerged, it can be interred. By the very landscape it relied on, the rivers that gave it life and trade, they wrote its epitaph in mud. Telling the difference between a drowned city and a buried one, the forces are different. One is a sudden cataclysm or a slow creep of salt water. The other is a gradual, patient accumulation, but the result is the same. a coastline of human activity erased. Waiting for the right method to read the soil, like a sunken map, and from this city sealed in silt, the search moves back to a forest of stone, standing silent in the deep. Rows of pale stone rise from the water in the Saronic Gulf. They break the surface near Epidaurus like the spine of something huge and submerged, their Doric columns fallen but still holding their shape. They mark a harbor that's been forgotten, a harbor for the sanctuary of Asclepius, which was inland from here. That sanctuary was a famous healing center. People know the great theater there for the acoustics, but the sanctuary was more than that. It was a hospital for the body and the soul. Pilgrims came from all over the Greek world looking for cures. They followed rituals, they slept in special rooms hoping for a healing dream from the god. They drank from sacred springs, and for many, the journey ended right here on this coastline. The sea was the road. They would have stepped onto a busy waterfront where these columns once supported a roof. Archaeologists think it was a Roman villa or a grand stoa. Part of the system that received the sick from the water. The fact that it's underwater now is a lesson in tectonic patience. This part of the Argolid Peninsula sits on a restless boundary. The land is sinking slowly, millimeter by millimeter, century after century. You combine that slow sinking with the sea level rise since Roman times, and the picture is clear. The water has moved in. It took back the edge of the ancient world. What was a working quay, noisy with ships and pilgrims, is now a quiet site for snorkelers. Those columns are a measuring stick. They show exactly how far the coastline has retreated since the sanctuary's peak. Losing this harbor was more than geography. It cut a lifeline. When the sea took the docks and the buildings, the journey to Epidaurus got harder. It probably changed the flow of pilgrims. It reduced the sanctuary's role as an international healing center. The coastline and the connection it offered was part of the site's power. It makes you wonder about other sacred sites. How many temples, how many oracle sites were chosen because of the sea? Their spiritual power was tied to practical geography. When that coastline shifts, when a harbor silts up or sinks, the place itself changes. The quiet columns at Epidaurus stand guard for all those lost gateways where faith once met the open water. And that leads to a final discovery, a place where the past isn't just preserved, it feels completely alive. The list of 25 isn't a final count. It's a starting point. The next part is happening now, but not with digging. It's using sound and light and machines that move on their own through the dark. The search for what's underwater is speeding up because the technology lets us see through water and through the seabed almost like it's clear. Autonomous underwater vehicles. Oh, they're quiet scouts. They can map huge sections of the ocean floor with extreme detail. They follow set paths for days. They collect data a diver could never get. And there's advanced sonar. It creates 3D images of the bottom. It shows the small rises and depressions that might be a fallen wall or an old channel filled in. Then from even higher up satellites, they can sense tiny changes in the height of the sea surface, which can suggest something big is buried underneath, affecting the water. These tools are changing the ocean, from a place that hides things to something you can almost read, so the search has clearer places to look now. The wide continental shelves that used to be dry land. The Sahel Shelf that connected Australia to New Guinea, it was a rich landscape. The first people to reach the continent walked across it, the Persian Gulf. It was a whole fertile basin, a green place fed by rivers, before the Indian Ocean flooded it maybe 8,000 years ago. These weren't empty spaces. They were the routes and the homes for people in the Paleolithic. As the oceanographer Nicholas Fleming has pointed out, the chance of finding sites from that time is good. We're close to finds that could change the story of how humans moved along coasts. To find a campsite underwater from 40,000 years ago, that would change everything. It would show that some of the key journeys in prehistory are now under 100 meters of water, which means our map of the ancient world isn't finished. Every city on that list is just a known point, a confirmed spot on a much bigger map that's mostly empty. The real coastlines from back then are coming into view slowly. With every jump in technology, we're not just accidentally finding ruins anymore, we're scanning, systematically, the lost continents from the last ice age. So the next 10 years, they might show a group of villages on that flooded plain in the Persian Gulf, or the stone tools left by the first Australians sitting on the coastline they followed, which is now underwater. The machines are in place, the maps are getting made. That 25th city isn't one specific ruin, it's the next one we locate, the one that makes us rethink the story all over again. That forward motion, that feeling of the frontier getting bigger, leads to one last idea that ties it all together. The water doesn't erase cities, it writes stories. Every great flood myth, the biblical one, the Hindu story of Manu, Gilgamesh, the Celtic tales of Lyoness, they all share a truth. It's a memory of water winning. These 25 sunken places show that link, geology and legend. A real tsunami drowns Helike, and that becomes the allegory of Atlantis. The slow creep that took Doggerland, that echoes in 100 stories of a world lost. These aren't coincidences, it's the human mind trying to make sense of a trauma that reshaped the world. When the ground liquefies, when the sea advances each year, you don't just record it. You weave it into your culture, you create a story, divine punishment, a warning about pride, a tale of a hero who escaped. The physical ruins are the anchor. The myth is the chain. It connects generations to that anchor long after the land is gone, and that shows us something about memory. Oral traditions passed down for thousands of years, they can preserve the core truth of an event. The details become symbolic, the characters become gods, but the central fact remains a great flood that changed everything. The sunken city is the proof. It validates the story, it turns myth into a kind of long-form history, not written on papyrus but in the collective consciousness. That connection forces us to listen. These aren't mere fables, they are encoded observations. Our ancestors were keen, terrified witnesses to a planet in flux. We even have a modern word for what they felt. Solastalgia, the distress of seeing your home environment change beyond recognition. That deep unease, watching a coastline vanish, a sacred grove drown, a spring turn salty. The people of Pavlopetri, of Rungholt, of Sundal, and they weren't just losing property, they were losing their world, their sense of place. That loss, that solastalgia, it had to go somewhere. It went into the stories they told, into the warnings. Do not build too close to the water. Remember what happened when the earth shook. So these submerged blueprints, they do more than map old coastlines. They map the human experience of environmental change. They show our history was never separate from planetary processes. We've always been dancing with a dynamic Earth, building on its temporary stages and then fleeing when the stage collapses. Our ancestors weren't passive. They were observers, they adapted, they migrated. And they remembered. They turned observations into narrative so the lesson would outlive them, which leads to the final question these silent cities ask. We live in an era of rapid change. Our coastlines are shifting again, this time in decades, not millennia. What stories are we creating right now? What memories are forming in communities facing rising seas, stronger storms? The myths of the future are being written today, in the decisions we make, in the losses we incur. These sunken cities are more than archaeological sites. They are mirrors. They show the line between geology and human story is fluid. It always has been. They remind us we're part of this long narrative, this ongoing story of a changing planet. Our chapter is being written. The question is, what tale will the water tell about us? Those blueprints on the seafloor, they're a different map, not of borders but of planetary memory. We've sailed across millennia from the spires of Dwarka to the forests of Doggerland, 25 sunken cities, and they're more than curiosities, they're markers. Charting the true coastlines of the ancient world, each stone is a data point, a fixed coordinate in a geography that's gone. Together, they trace shorelines that have retreated, advanced. Rewritten by the patient force of the earth, this map shows us the ground we take for granted. It's a temporary arrangement, a snapshot in a story of continuous change. These ruins teach us that myth is rooted in geological truth. The great flood stories in every culture, they aren't just fables, they're long memories. The human way of processing a trauma witnessed by generations, the creep of water, the collapse of land, the loss of a homeland, Helike gives us Atlantis. The drowning of Sunderland whispers in island legends. When a community experiences that change, it weaves the event into its identity. It becomes a warning. A lesson, a sacred story. The city under the waves is the proof. The myth is its echo. Humanity has always lived on this edge, literal and metaphorical. We build our greatest ports, our sacred temples, right where land meets sea. We harness that boundary for trade, for connection, yet that frontier is never still. It's a zone of immense energy, constant negotiation. The stories of these cities lost to rising seas, tectonic size, even war, they all speak to adaptation and memory. They show communities facing the unimaginable. Some fled inland, some built higher walls, some just passed down the story, so their children would remember the shape of the lost shore. That resilience is written in the artifacts left behind, in the legends that survived. Now our technology lets us peer deeper into the blue. Autonomous vehicles map drowned river plains. Sonar reveals shapes, hints of forgotten settlements. Each discovery is a fragment of a larger puzzle, a reminder that a significant chapter of the human story isn't archived on dry land. It's resting in the quiet dark of continental shelves, waiting to be read. This isn't just about lost treasure. It's about recovering context, understanding the full routes of ancient migration. The true extent of early trade, the complete map of our ancestral world. This exploration is a call to look at coastlines with new eyes, with wonder and with respect. That strip of sand, that cliff, that modern port, they're temporary layers in a deep geological story. They hold the secrets of who we were, empires and fishing villages alike. And they carry a quiet warning about changes yet to come. The processes that sank these cities have not stopped. The earth still moves, the seas are still rising. The past, resting just offshore, is a teacher for our future.